Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Jameson Lopp, engineer at BitGo. Jameson, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, this is going to be very exciting now. You tweeted, those who scoffed at the thought of $1,000 Bitcoin are scoffing at the $10,000 price for Bitcoin and will scoff at $100,000 per Bitcoin. What's going on?
Well, of course, I don't mean to make any near-term price predictions. I'm a very long-term, bullish, crypto and self-sovereign kind of guy. But really, I mean, even today, with these massive bubbles that we've been seeing in the crypto economy, it's still just a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the world. And so many people have yet to even begin to grasp what's going on, that the idea of 10 or 100, possibly even $1 million Bitcoins is not outside of the realm of possibility.
Right. I remember when Rick Fogvina up there in Stockholm back in 2011, when Bitcoin was $20 or $30, a Bitcoin was talking about $100,000 Bitcoin based on Bitcoin grabbing a percentage of global foreign exchange market. And now here we are 5, 6 years later. Couple of things. Number one, you're not alone in talking about $100,000 Bitcoin. It's been talked about on CNBC and other mainstream outlets now. And the idea of it grabbing a percentage of foreign exchange market is becoming more talked about, because this is where this token, this currency is going, right?
Definitely. And of course, you have so many people who are using it for different things, and a lot of the debate that's going on in the community is digital gold versus payment rails. And I've actually seen some very interesting analysis that says, you know, if you look at Bitcoin as a payment rail competing against Visa, MasterCard, whatever, that is actually tiny in comparison to using Bitcoin as a digital gold, as a store of value. So if we're really going for the store of value, we have a much larger market where we only have to capture a smaller share of the market in order for the price to go to the moon, as they say.
Right. I mean, I got involved with Bitcoin at that conference with Rick Fogvina back in 2011 when the price was $3 a Bitcoin. And to me, it was always a store of value. It was always digital gold. It was, so as you point out, that market is huge. But this whole scaling debate kind of gets back to this, whether it's a store of value versus a mechanism of transfer of value mechanism, a rail system, a rail of transactions. And so where are we at the scaling debate? Because you were moderating a panel at Consensus in New York, and this has gone on now for a couple of years. Can you just explain what the debate is and where are we in the debate?
The debate is a result of technical limitations with the protocol, in the fact that transactions have to go into blocks, and blocks only happen every 10 minutes, and they can only be about a megabyte, have a few thousand transactions. So the resulting technical attribute of the system is you can only really do about 3 to 5 transactions per second globally on the Bitcoin network, which is pitiful in comparison to something like Visa or MasterCard. But if you are looking at more of a digital gold, then it doesn't even compare. I mean, good luck trying to send gold across the world in a matter of minutes.
Well, let's talk about, the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, which came out in 2008, and really set the stage for this whole thing. How would he address this debate, the scaling debate, based on what's in the actual white paper? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the white paper, he did speak about something called simplified payment verification, or SPV, which is a way that you can use Bitcoin without running a full node and without having to necessarily use all of the resources required for full validation. But unfortunately, SPV has not yet gotten to the point that a lot of us would like in terms of security. You're still vulnerable to a few potential attacks of nodes lying to you. So there are a number of different ways that we can scale and make it easier to use Bitcoin without having as many computational resources. But Satoshi did not quite fulfill his vision, and of course you'll see people quoting Satoshi this way or that way and trying to use it as an argument for scaling one way or another. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what Satoshi envisioned or even what Satoshi, if he's out there, thinks today. All that really matters is what the people in the community who are participating are arguing about and deciding to move in a certain direction.
So the white paper has become like the Bible or the Quran?
For some people, yes. It is being quoted out of context in many cases.
Okay, so, well, now there are competitors. Litecoin, for example, is faster block times, and it's grown tremendously in market cap. So why wouldn't there just be more of a, and they adopted SegWit, yep. Right? So we'll get into what that means and what that is all about. So why not just move over to Litecoin for those who want more transactions?
Absolutely, and you can. And in fact, Ryan X. Charles, who is building a project called Yours, has moved his project over to Litecoin, basically citing that, you know, even with SegWit and payment channels, Litecoin is so much cheaper to create an on-chain transaction and thus open and close these off-chain payment mechanisms that it ends up being a lot better for his business model. But he will also admit that at the end of the day, Litecoin is still going to have the same on-chain scaling problems that Bitcoin has. It just happens to be able to do about 4 to 5x as much on-chain right now. But still, drop in the bucket. Like if you actually get mainstream adoption, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, all of these cryptocurrencies are terrible at scaling right now, and they will all end up kind of buckling under the load if real mainstream adoption happens, which is why we need to find ways to scale these systems.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of mainstream adoption, we're seeing huge growth in India, for example, which makes sense because the government recently totally revamped the currency system. They got rid of all the one denomination, brought in a new denomination, remonetization, total chaos. And I think the people there are saying, why don't we just get into this cryptocurrency? It seems to work really well for us. And will they do an end run around the government? So far, I guess the topic here is regulation and governments, because governments are a little behind the curve. They're not sure what's going on, how to regulate it, if to regulate it. But in the case of India, if there's a critical mass adopts Bitcoin and Bitcoin transaction and crypto, it'll do an end run around the government. Is that a fair statement? What do you think?
Sure. And my understanding from speaking with people I know from India, I have a number of coworkers from India, is that there has been a lot of sidestepping of government and taxation historically. A lot of the times this would actually happen with real estate, where you go to buy a house and there's the official price and then there's the actual price where you're paying a lot of the value of the house under the table in cash so you don't have to get taxed on it. And that was kind of the result of what a lot of the Indian government was talking about, this quote-unquote black money that they were trying to get rid of. And so it's, I think, built into the culture and the history there. Like they already have that concept. Now the question is if they can transition to this new digital version.
Yeah, it's they have over in India the concept of blank currency with nothing on it that people use when they're asked to pay a bribe. And to emphasize that this is a bribe and I don't want to pay a bribe. And this is, as you say, it's part of the culture. It's been for quite some time. So we mentioned SegWit, segregated witness. It's a technical approach to this scaling debate. And I guess if you can get into it a little bit, just kind of, if you can frame it and talk about it a little bit, it'd be nice. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of different plus sides to SegWit, and unfortunately a lot of the vitriol and debate has come down to the on-chain transactions. But really the most interesting technical part of it is the fix for what we call transaction malleability. And without going into the details, there are ways where you can create a Bitcoin transaction and then a third party can slightly modify an aspect of it that doesn't actually change any of the values or the addresses, but changes the hash, which is the fingerprint or the unique identifier. And that causes a lot of problems when you want to do these off-chain scaling mechanisms. You need to have a hash that cannot be chained. So that you can then kind of anchor in to these on-chain transactions. And in order...
So the hash is that bit that refers to the previous block.
So there are a lot of hashes in the system, but this specifically, we're talking about the hash of the transaction itself, which is just the way that we uniquely point to it, either in a block or, if it's not in a block, in the mempool. And in order to be able to point to a transaction and be sure that it will never change, no one will be able to manipulate it, you need to have a cryptographically provable, like unchangeable hash. And right now we don't have that. And it's caused a lot of problems in the past. In fact, way back in the day, Mt. Gox had a number of issues where they said, oh, it's transaction malleability. And basically they got fooled. They got fooled into thinking they were doing withdrawals.
That's right. I knew that phrase brought back nightmares. From the Mt. Gox days, transaction malleability. That was, yes.
It is a long-standing issue in the protocol. Many people consider it a bug, and it has been used to fool people in the past to think that they had done a transaction or not done a transaction, and then people would get like multiple withdrawals out of Mt. Gox because they would tell support, oh, the transaction actually didn't happen, but what happened was they had malleated it. But that's not nearly as interesting as trying to build these second-layer networks on top of it and just needing a fix for that. Unfortunately, a lot of people are now getting kind of caught up in the on-chain, like how many on-chain transactions can happen with or without SegWit, and I think that's kind of missing the whole point of it, and I don't really bother debating about that too much.
Right. So you mentioned Mt. Gox there. So last time Bitcoin was surging toward $1,000 per Bitcoin, the Mt. Gox blew up. It was really the only game in town. It was the biggest exchange in the world. It was kind of built on an old, trading card system, if you will, and it wasn't anywhere up for the task. And the community lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And the price dropped down to 200, to just under 200. And it looked like, people were writing the obituary of Bitcoin. I think there's been 150 or 160 formal obituaries of Bitcoin. But it's totally recovered since then. And you don't have that kind of single point of failure with a Mt. Gox, which was kind of the only game in town. Exchanges, there are
hundreds of exchanges.
Hundreds of exchanges.
Yes, definitely a lot better now. And of course, the problem was that for one reason or another, Mt. Gox was operating as a fractional reserve, and it may have been due to getting fooled by fractional or by transaction malleability. It may have been due to any number of other bugs that they had in that system. It was a very buggy system, but at the end of the day, we have
now those bugs can be turned into tokens and traded on Shapeshift.
Indeed.
We'll get cut it off there, right? We'll pick it up for our second segment, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Erb. We want to thank our guest, Jameson Loop. He's the engineer at BitGo. You can catch us on Twitter at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.
Jack it up.